The give up probably was when I married Steve McQueen, when indeed I did give up my career. But always
At 85, Ali MacGraw no longer hides behind nostalgia. Sitting by the window of her quiet Santa Fe home, she faces the camera with the serenity of someone who has outlived both fame and regret. The interviewer asks softly, "When you think of Steve McQueen now, what comes to mind?" Ali takes a long breath. Her silver hair trembles in the afternoon light. Then she says, almost in a whisper, "He was the love of my life and the reason I lost myself." The sentence hangs in the air like dust after an explosion, beautiful, shimmering, and impossible to ignore. For decades, their love story had been written in the colors of rebellion and glamour. The getaway made them Hollywood's most magnetic couple, the untamed man and the refined woman who dared to follow him into chaos. But what the world celebrated as passion was, in truth, a storm neither of them could control. In her eyes, the past is not a reel of golden memories, but a race that never ended. She remembers the roar of engines, the smell of leather, the endless highways where Steve drove too fast as if speed could silence his demons. And she remembers herself beside him, terrified and exhilarated, realizing that she was no longer steering her own life. He needed danger the way other men need air. She says quietly, "And I thought I could save him." The world saw them as lovers against the world. But behind the flashbulbs and magazine covers was a woman disappearing, piece by piece, into a man who could never slow down. Their marriage was not built on peace, but on adrenaline. Every argument felt like a car chase, every silence like a crash waiting to happen. Now, half a century later, Ali MacGraw dares to reopen the wounds she once hid from the cameras. Her voice carries neither anger nor bitterness, only the calm of someone who has finally stopped running. Was theirs a love story or a survival tale? And can two souls born to chase ever find rest in each other's arms? To understand what Ali MacGraw lost, one must first remember who she was before Steve McQueen. In the early 1970 seconds, she was Hollywood's new emblem of grace, the woman who had turned heartbreak into poetry. After Love Story 1970, she wasn't just an actress, she was a phenomenon. Her face was everywhere on magazine covers, perfume ads, billboards shimmering above Sunset Boulevard. She embodied a certain kind of fragile perfection, the calm after a storm, the woman men wanted to protect and women wanted to resemble. At the same time, Steve McQueen was the most dangerous man in Hollywood, not because of violence, but because of what he represented. He was the anti-star, the rebel who refused to play by anyone's rules. Born in poverty, abandoned by his parents, he built himself out of anger and ambition. His eyes carried the defiance of a man who had fought too hard to trust anyone. He was fast cars, leather jackets, and silenced the language of men who'd survived too much. When they met on the set of The Getaway in 1972, it was less a meeting than a collision. He was magnetic, raw, unpredictable. She was elegant, disciplined, controlled. On screen, their chemistry was explosive. Off screen, it became combustible. To the public, they were Hollywood's perfect paradox, the wild outlaw and the poetic beauty, the man who couldn't be tamed and the woman who thought she could. They were the hottest couple on earth. One journalist wrote, "When they entered a room, the air itself seemed to change temperature." But perfection, especially in Hollywood, is a mask designed to crack. Beneath the glamour, the cracks began early. Steve was fiercely possessive. He checked where she went, who she met, what she wore. He wanted loyalty, but his definition of loyalty was absolute control. For a woman who had built her image on independence, It was a slow suffocation. Ollie, still glowing with newfound fame, found herself torn between two empires, the career she had just begun and the man who demanded she abandon it. He wanted a wife, not a star. She later recalled, "He didn't want me on set, didn't want me in front of the camera. He wanted me to be there when he came home, no matter how late, no matter what mood he was in." She tried. For a while, she believed that giving up her world for him was proof of love. She traded the cameras for quiet, the red carpet for the desert, premieres for the sound of engines echoing across the California hills. Friends stopped calling. Scripts stopped arriving. The girl who had once represented the future of Hollywood vanished into the shadow of its most dangerous man. Still, there were moments of tenderness. Steve, in his own broken way, loved her. He would bring her wildflowers from the road, cook dinner shirtless in the kitchen, tell her she was the only person who ever made him feel safe. But love was never enough to tame his restlessness. He distrusted the world, the studios, the press, even his friends. Fame had taught him that everyone wanted something. And so, when Ali received calls from producers, photographers, old friends, Steve saw betrayal. "He couldn't understand that I needed something beyond him," she said. "He thought that meant I didn't love him enough." What followed was a slow unraveling. Arguments that began over nothing, a phone call, a glance, a delay would explode into hours of silence. Ali learned to measure his moods the way one reads a weather forecast, hoping to predict the next storm. And yet, every time she thought of leaving, he would find a way to pull her back. There was something about his vulnerability, his childlike need for connection, that disarmed her. "He could be cruel," she said, "but then he would look at me with those eyes. And suddenly I saw the little boy who had never been loved enough." To outsiders, they were still the golden couple photographed on motorcycles, smiling under the desert sun. But in truth, those smiles were armor. Behind closed doors, the silence between them grew heavier. She stopped laughing. He stopped trusting. Fame, once intoxicating, had turned into a mirror they no longer recognized themselves in. "I think we both wanted to disappear," Ali admitted years later. "But we were too proud to ask for help. We mistook destruction for passion." By 1977, their marriage was a house built on gasoline and sparks. Steve's paranoia deepened. He believed she would leave him, betray him, or worse, outshine him. He began to push her away before she could prove him right. The woman who had once been Hollywood's symbol of composure was now a ghost in her own story. Her career was gone. Her confidence eroded. Yet, in her eyes, there remained a trace of devotion, the tragic loyalty of someone who confuses endurance with love. And so, the illusion held. To the world, they were still beautiful. But beneath the surface, two hearts were running out of breath. Trapped in a race, neither could win. There is a kind of silence that follows chaos, a silence so thick it feels alive. For Ali MacGraw, that silence filled the years after she walked away from Steve McQueen. But before the silence came the storm. She often said that being married to him was like living with a mirror that reflected only my fears. At first, she mistook the turbulence for depth. Every fight seemed to prove they cared. Every reconciliation felt like a victory. "We loved in extremes," she would later confess. "When it was good, it was heaven. When it was bad, it was survival." In their small house near Malibu, surrounded by motorbikes, whiskey bottles, and the endless noise of engines, she tried to build a home around a man who could never stay still. He would vanish for days, racing, drinking, chasing the kind of danger that made him feel real. Then he'd return with the guilt of a child, tender and broken, and she would forgive him because she saw in him something fragile, something almost sacred, the boy abandoned by the world. But love built on rescue is never safe. Ali had always been strong, raised by a mother who taught her poise and dignity, but Steve's world stripped that armor away. He demanded loyalty, but offered uncertainty. He wanted devotion without boundaries. She learned to read his moods before sunrise, to silence her opinions before they sparked a fight, to smile when he turned away. I stopped hearing my own voice. She once said, it was drowned out by the sound of his needs. There were moments, though, that still haunt her for their beauty. Nights in the desert when the stars burned too bright, when Steve would lie beside her and whisper dreams that belonged to no one else. Well, disappear one day, he said once, staring into the sky. No movies, no people, just us and the open road. She almost believed him. She almost believed that love could save a man from himself. But fame had its own gravity. And so did fear. Steve was trapped by both. Every success reminded him of how easily it could vanish. Every compliment felt like a lie. To him, the world was an enemy waiting to take something away. Ali became both sanctuary and threat. When she loved him too gently, he called her naive. When she tried to assert herself, he called her cold. He wanted a woman who would follow him anywhere, she said, but he couldn't stand the idea that she had her own map. In those years, she lost not just her career, but her sense of identity. She turned down films, refused interviews, disappeared from the circles that once adored her. The woman who had once spoken about art, politics, and independence now measured her days by his temper. I was proud to be his wife, she said, but somewhere along the way, I forgot to be myself. Their love became a loop of highs and collapses. They would fight, separate, reunite, each reunion more fragile than the last. Friends avoided visiting, producers stopped calling. Yet Ali stayed, out of love, out of fear, out of habit. Sometimes she imagined herself as a character trapped in one of his movies, a woman clinging to a man, speeding toward destruction. And then, as abruptly as it began, the story cracked. In 1978, she left. No shouting, no grand goodbye. Just a quiet walk out of the house, a suitcase, and a long drive into a future she couldn't yet see. I loved him too much to keep living that way, she said years later, and he loved me too much to let me stay. After the divorce, Steve spiraled deeper into solitude. He moved to the desert, surrounded himself with cars, guns, and isolation. He remarried briefly, but his health was already failing. Cancer came like a thief in the night, swift, merciless, and final. For Ali, those years after his death were filled with reckoning. She retreated to New Mexico, rebuilt her life from fragments. She learned yoga, worked with addiction recovery programs, spoke about compassion and self-worth. Yet, beneath every word, the shadow of McQueen lingered. You don't stop loving someone because they hurt you, she said once. You stop when you finally forgive yourself for staying. There is a photograph she keeps Steve sitting on the hood of his Mustang, cigarette in hand, the wind tearing through his hair. She said it captured him exactly as he was, defiant, unreachable, and utterly alive. That's how I want to remember him, she said. Not as the man who broke me, but as the man who taught me where my limits were. Sometimes, When she speaks about him now, there's a faint smile, almost maternal. She understands that his rage was a language he never learned to translate. Beneath his bravado was a boy who believed that to be loved was to lose control. And maybe that's why she stayed so long, because, deep down, she shared that fear. She too was running, chasing a version of love that could erase her loneliness. Together, they were two fugitives, not from the law, but from themselves. I think we recognized each other's damage, she once reflected, and that made it impossible to walk away. You can't save someone who doesn't believe they're worth saving, but you can love them until you finally realize you deserve peace. When asked what she would say to him if she could, Ailey didn't hesitate. "I'd tell him I understand now. That we were both too young in spirit, too wild in pride, to know what love really meant." Then she smiled faintly. "And that I still wish had slowed down." For her, the past isn't a chain anymore, it's a mirror. She has learned to look at it without flinching, to see not the destruction, but the depth. "It's strange," she said, "how something that nearly killed me also made me more human. Love," she realized, was never meant to be a finish line. It was the chase itself, the desire to understand another soul, even when it means getting lost in the process. And though the race ended decades ago, its echoes remain. In her quiet voice, in the stillness of her mornings, in the way she looks out the window and smiles, not with regret, but with the kind of peace that comes only after surviving fire. The biggest shock of all came not in the chaos of their marriage, but years after its ashes had settled. In 1980, Steve McQueen was dying. The man who had outrun everything studios, the press, the police. Even love couldn't outrun the cancer that had begun to consume him from the inside. Mesothelioma. They called it a cruel thief that targeted the lungs of a man who had built his entire life on breath, motion, and speed. He moved to Mexico for treatment, away from the cameras, away from Hollywood. He wanted to disappear quietly, as if even death should not be allowed to see him too closely. Friends said he spent long days staring at the horizon, driving when he could, smoking when he shouldn't, and talking less than ever. But it wasn't until after his death that one of those friends reached out to Ali MacGraw. He brought her something small, a worn leather wallet that had been found among Steve's things. Inside, between old receipts and folded bills, was a single photograph, their wedding day. The picture was faded, almost fragile. Steve in a light suit, looking uncomfortable but happy, Ali laughing beside him, her eyes still full of belief. On the back, written in his unmistakable handwriting, were 3 words, "My best day." Ali didn't cry. Not at first. She just held the photograph and sat in silence. "He kept this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The friend nodded. "He never stopped loving you," he said quietly. "He just didn't know how to show it." That was the moment the walls of time collapsed. The anger, the grief, the confusion all dissolved into something pure, almost childlike. For years she had believed that their love was a wound that never healed. Now she realized it had never truly died. He was the most contradictory man I ever knew. She later said, "He wanted love desperately, but was terrified of it. He wanted freedom, but he couldn't stand to be alone." And I think, in the end, that's what broke us. There was another revelation too, one she carried privately for years. Before his illness worsened, Steve had written her a letter. It never reached her. He had given it to a friend, asking him to deliver it when the time felt right. That time never came. Decades later, the letter found its way to her. It was short, written in the kind of language that comes only when pride is gone. Ali, I don't know how to say sorry in a way that matters. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I ruined it. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. Steve. She read it under the same light where she had once given that interview. Now older, softer, unguarded. It was the first time he ever said the word sorry. She whispered. And it came when I no longer needed it. But perhaps that was the gift, the closure that time. Not words. Had been building all along. That photograph and that letter became symbols of something larger than regret. They were proof that even the most damaged hearts can love deeply, even if imperfectly. For Ali, they were the final pieces of a puzzle that had defined her life. The world remembered Steve McQueen as the king of cool. But to Ali, he was something entirely different, a man forever on the run from his own tenderness. He wasn't cool, she said once. He was frightened. He just hid it better than anyone. It's a haunting truth that sometimes the people who seem the strongest are simply those who are most afraid to be seen. Steve's silence was not cruelty, it was defense. His speed was not rebellion, it was fear of stillness. And when the engines finally stopped, when the man who could never slow down was forced to face stillness forever, it was love, not fame, that remained in his pocket. Ali often says she never remarried because part of her heart stayed with him, frozen in that photograph. It wasn't that I couldn't love again, she explains. It's just that I didn't need to chase anymore. In a world that glorifies survival, she found grace in surrender. The wildest man in Hollywood had left behind the quietest confession imaginable, a picture and a few words that said everything he couldn't while alive. And maybe that's the cruel poetry of it all, that the man who taught the world how to move fast only understood love when time finally slowed him down. When Ali MacGraw speaks about love now, her voice carries the calm of someone who has made peace with imperfection. She no longer romanticizes what happened between her and Steve McQueen. She simply sees it as it was two souls colliding in the only language they knew, intensity. It took me decades to understand. She once said, "Love isn't supposed to burn you alive. It's supposed to keep you warm." Time has turned their story into myth. The actress and the king of cool, beauty and rebellion, locked in a dance that consumed them both. But behind that legend lies a quiet truth. Not all great loves are meant to last. Some exist only to teach us what love is not. Steve's photograph and final letter became more than relics of a past life. They became her compass. Through them, she learned that forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone else. It's a door you open for yourself. For years, she had carried guilt like a shadow, guilt for leaving, guilt for staying, guilt for surviving. Now, she understands that survival was the truest form of love she could offer both of them. In Santa Fe, her days are quiet. She paints. She walks her dogs. She watches the sunset. Sometimes she imagines Steve out there somewhere still driving, still chasing the horizon. If he's found peace, she says, then maybe we both finally finish the race. What remains of their story is neither tragedy nor victory, but a lesson written in fire and silence. Love can be beautiful even when it's broken. It can transform us, destroy us, rebuild us often all at once. In the end, Ali MacGraw's greatest revelation is not that she survived Steve McQueen, but that she survived herself. She found the courage to stop running, to stand still long enough to see that peace is not the absence of love. It's what love leaves behind when it's done its work. Perhaps that is the true meaning of the chase that never ended. It wasn't about cars, or fame, or danger. It was about the pursuit of something far more elusive. A place where two wild hearts could finally rest.